Okay, I think we'll get started. Thank you all for signing in and taking interest in our webinar today. I am with Habitat Canada. Aquatic Habitat Canada is, as you know, a national organization, and we're working to promote aquatic habitat conservation and particularly restoration. And we're hosting this webinar series as a part of our program to help improve our network, to help improve learning and understanding of habitat restoration issues. And you can see in the bottom corner of the slide there, we've got several social media channels that you can plug into if you're interested and track what we and our allies are doing in regard to habitat restoration. So I'm joining you today from the unceded territory, the Coast Salish peoples, particularly the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, and Sechelt peoples on the West Coast. And I know we've got people signed up here from all across the country and all different territories, Indigenous communities there. So I would suggest, if you're interested, in the chat, you can see if you just click the bottom bar on your screen, the chat function there, I'd invite people to put in the name of the traditional lands or territories of Indigenous groups where you live. And if you don't know the spelling, that's okay. It'd be interesting to see where everyone's from and also an acknowledgement of all of those territories. So thank you. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Samantha Lau.
Hi, everyone.
And Samantha's going to be monitoring the chat. She'll be looking for questions, and she'll give us some instructions in a few moments about how we're going to engage questions and have hand raising. We won't have the functions on while the panelists are making their presentations, but we will have some opportunity for you to plug in to get clarifying questions right after the presentations, and then we'll open it up more, which Sam will describe. And as you can see here, I'm Bill Wareham. I'm the program manager for Aquatic Habitat Canada, and based out of the West Coast here in Gibson's, just north of Vancouver. And yeah, you can see our emails there, Sam and myself. You can reach us anytime if you're interested in following up with us on today's presentation or any other issues related to Aquatic Habitat Canada's work. And so what we do with Aquatic Habitat Canada is we're really a networking organization. We have members from all different sectors and individuals, companies, associations, Indigenous groups. And the intention is to network people on these issues that they're involved with related to habitat restoration. Our objective is really to help people engage in different things, from actual works of restoration to improving policies. And as you know, right now, DFO has a fish and fish habitat protection program underway, and a lot of work they're trying to do to develop policy and regulations there. So we're trying to engage our audience in those issues, and also to support the planning and priority setting for aquatic habitat protection and restoration. That can take many faces, everything from funding facilitation of networks getting together, collaborations, funding, etc. So that's who we are, and you can see on our website for more information there. We've also, in the third point I just raised there about trying to identify habitat restoration opportunities, we're undertaking a project to explore the options for developing a national aquatic habitat restoration opportunities database. And in order to determine whether there's a need for this and what the best utility would be in a national database like this, we've got a survey out right now. And Sam's going to put the link to the survey in the chat box. If you're interested in that and would like to fill that out, that would be wonderful. We're trying to get as many people from across the country as possible to give us some feedback. We've partnered with H3M Environmental to undertake the survey for us. And as you can see on the screen there, there's a chance to win one of 10 Tim Hortons $20 gift cards if you fill out the survey. So have a look at that later if you want. And as I said, it's in the chat. You can download the link there. And today, our objectives for this webinar particularly are to engage a learning opportunity for those interested in cumulative effects in aquatic environments. Now, this may be part of your work. It may be something you're studying. It could be mandate of your organization in any way. And we hope that the presentations and the dialogue here add to your understanding and learning of cumulative effects, particularly how they relate to the Fisheries Act and the Department of Fisheries and Oceans mandate in regard to the cumulative effects assessments and consideration that they have to take under the new act. This presentation series that we have right now and the dialogues are on a range of issues. And the one today is really to focus on the cumulative effects as it relates to the Fisheries Act. As you know, the cumulative effects issue is very large. It depends on the scope you're looking at, on what that assessment would look like. But we're really trying to maintain the goalposts and focus here on how it relates to the Fisheries Act and the work that the federal government does in regard to authorizing works related to aquatic habitats. And then the third point of our event today is to discuss options for the key points that could be provided as feedback to DFO. So they have a engagement process on right now on their fish and fish habitat protection program. And you can find that if you haven't seen it yet at talkfishhabitat.ca, and Sam will put that link to the website in the chat as well. In that website is a lot of information about these issues. There's briefing papers, there's slide decks from DFO, there is recordings of sessions they've had, open house sessions, etc. And there's an input portal that you can engage in to provide comments directly to DFO. And on this particular issue and several others, the deadline for the first round of submissions on their online website portal is the end of this month. So we're hosting these webinar dialogues with the intention of improving people's knowledge, having a better understanding, getting some ideas. So we hope to distill out some of these ideas today. We'll be documenting that and providing a summary document afterwards. And this session is also being recorded, so you'll be able to go back and watch it again and listen if there's particular issues you want to hear again. Okay, so that's the intention for today. And on to the speakers that we have. We're very fortunate to have joining us today three expert panelists. Dr. Anna Charaserna is a longtime student and PhD of looking at aquatic habitat impacts and the cumulative effects of human activities on aquatic environments. She did a lot of work assessing both in the field and the academic literature around cumulative effects. And more recently, she's been working with Hatfield Consultants for the last few years, looking at the practical application of these issues and how to address cumulative impacts with real development projects. And then we have Deborah Carlson, staff lawyer with West Coast Environmental Law. Deborah's been with them for many years and has done a lot of work on freshwater, aquatic habitat, marine habitat issues, looking at the legal aspects, and has been doing some very focused work on this issue, which is the DFO, the new Fisheries Act and the obligations under that act that are the subject of the consultation and review process that DFO has underway now. And then finally, we have George Hegman, who is a senior principal at Stantec Canada, who has many, many years of experience, particular interest and expertise in cumulative effects. And George has worked on many projects across the country, and we look forward to his perspective on this. So without further description there, feel free to contact these people. You can either question them directly in the chat or arrange to contact them later and discuss the issue further if you wish. So on to how we're going to proceed. I'll throw this over to Sam now, who will describe just how we're going to use the chat functions.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. Happy to be here and join you. Just a couple housekeeping items for the Zoom platform. If you notice on the bottom bar, there is a Q&A window. Feel free to ask your questions and fill them in during the presentations. We might have time in between each presentation to take maybe one or two burning questions, but aside from that, you can just list those there, and we'll see those at the end when we have the large question and answer session. And the chat function is there as well for you to interact. And I've seen some great notes from people and where they're coming from. So that's really nice to see.
Okay, thanks, Sam. So yeah, we'll use the chat to the best we can. I mean, it's hard to know we currently have now almost 120 participants, so depends how active people are. But as we said, feel free to chat people directly if you want to have a bit of a conversation with them on any issues, and or put your questions, put up your hands, and we will, in between the speakers, take just questions for clarification of that presentation if necessary. Okay, so the agenda here, we're going to start with Anna, then to Deborah, and then George, and then we really have kind of a presentation here from an academic expert, a legal expert, and expert practitioner in the field. So we had hoped there might be some other speakers on the panel as well, but if you feel that you've got a strong background and expertise that you want to explain your perspective from a particular sector, whether that's an Indigenous group or an industry group or a conservation group, then we're going to allow some time right after the panelists. People can take 4 or 5 minutes to make a presentation. So if you'd like to be one of those people, you can just put a note in the chat to Sam that you would like to take a few minutes after the formal presentations to make your own little mini presentation, and that will help feed the conversation. As we go into the question and answer period, then it'll be a bit more free flow, and yeah, we'll go from there. So thanks again for joining. We'll start off now with Anna with the first presentation. Thank you, Anna. Well, and one other thing I wanted to mention for people, when the presentation comes up on the screen, you'll notice that there's a video box that will show up on the right-hand side of your screen, which contains the panelists. It could be along the top or the side. It should be down the side. If you just go to the top of that video stack, you can shrink it down. You can click the left icon at the top and it'll shrink it right down until there's no video. Or you can hit the second icon, which will just show the current speaker, in this case, Anna. And then you can always click it on the third icon to go back to the full video panel. So your discretion, because it does cover up some of the slide presentation in some cases. So I would recommend just going with the speaker at hand. Okay, over to you, Anna.
Good morning here in the West Coast, and good afternoon for everyone else. Can you hear me okay there?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, so first of all, thank you for being here, and thank you for inviting me to this conversation, to the organizers. I am glad to be part of this conversation. As Bill mentioned, I am currently working as an environmental consultant in North Vancouver, but most of my experience comes from academia, where I spent some time researching cumulative effects on aquatic ecosystems. So what I'm hoping to bring to this conversation today is an overview of some of the key findings of the science of cumulative effects, and what are some of the challenges that, as a practitioner, I found to apply those findings in the management of aquatic ecosystems. So I'm going to start this conversation with a definition. What are cumulative effects? So according to DFO, in their consultation paper at least, they define cumulative effects as the combined impacts of multiple stressors, both natural and anthropogenic, accumulated over space and time. So just to start us thinking about this subject, let's take the example of this small agricultural stream in an agricultural catchment. So even a single activity like agriculture can affect a stream ecosystem in several discrete ways and several different ways. Just to mention a few of them, the stream might be channelized, which is going to change the way the water moves in the system, and is therefore going to change the availability of different types of habitats like riffles or pools. They also remove the riparian forest, which has a lot of implications because it changes the inputs of materials that are entering the stream, for example, leaf litter that is food for some of the organisms living in the stream, but it's also changing the small scale hydrodynamics of the system, and is going to change the microclimatic conditions. So there might be more fluctuations in temperature. And then there are increased erosion, so there's more sediment, fine sediment entering the stream. All these things and etc. other effects, and we call each of these discrete disturbances stressors. So stressors are physical, chemical, or biological factors that might adversely affect the ecosystem. And the thing about having multiple stressors overlapping on the same ecosystem is that maybe in isolation, the effect of each of these stressors is negligible. But when you add them all together, their combined effects might be devastating for the ecosystem or for the organisms living in it. And to complicate matters even further, one of the key findings that I wanted to bring from the science of cumulative effects is that sometimes it's hard to predict what are going to be the combined impacts of multiple stressors in the systems based on their individual effects. So we are finding more and more that there are many mechanisms in which the presence of one stressor can exacerbate the impact of a second stressor. We call this synergistic effects. So the resulting effect in the environment is larger than the sum of the individual effects of the stressors. And there are also ways in which the opposite can happen, and we see antagonisms. So the effects of one stressor mitigate the effects of a second stressor. And what we're finding in the academia is that these types of complex or non-additive interactions might be quite common, or at least that is what we think so far. There have been a lot of experiments at different scales, laboratory experiments, microcosm experiments like the one I'm showing here in the picture, and big field studies that are finding that when you try to figure out how multiple stressors are interacting in the ecosystem, you're finding that there are a lot of non-additive interactions. For example, just to mention, freshwater ecosystems, and meta-analysis of 82 experiments found that 84% of the interactions that were studied were non-additive. And of these non-additive interactions, 41% were antagonistic, 28% were synergistic. And then for marine ecosystems, we're finding a similar story. So experiments that are conducted in marine systems are finding 74% of non-additive interactions. 38% of those are antagonistic and 36% are synergistic. So while these studies, it's not easy to scale up the results of these studies to real ecosystems, because these are limited. These are like small systems that have simplified communities, and we have everything controlled. We don't necessarily think that this is exactly the picture in real ecosystems, but this is giving us an indication that there are many mechanisms in which stressors can enhance each other and have worse effects than what we expect. So hopefully by now, basically I'm making the case that it's important to understand the issue of cumulative effects, even at the small scale of a small agricultural stream. Now I'm going to take us back to the scale that is actually relevant to the engagement process that started this discussion today. When DFO is thinking about improving its ability to manage cumulative effects, they are not just talking about managing multiple stressors at the local scale, but more broadly about managing cumulative effects of their decisions on the landscape. So I like to think about things in examples in real life. So let's think about the Athabasca River Basin. The Athabasca River is often used as a case study for cumulative effects research and practice here in Canada, because it's one of the most stressed river systems in the country. This river originates, as we all know, in the Columbia ice fields in the Rockies and flows north to Lake Athabasca, and it covers several ecoregions, so it has ecological importance, and it also has great cultural importance. It is home to more than 9 First Nations groups, and it's also an area of a lot of economical importance. So there has been, in the last decades, a lot of developments that we all know. We have the oil sands, we have large-scale forestry, large-scale agriculture, pulp and paper mills, and increases in urbanization. So in this river system context, the individual projects that are happening in different parts of the watershed are contributing incremental levels of disturbance that they might add or they might interact in synergistic ways. And then we're going to see that when we see effects here in especially in the lower reaches of the Athabasca River, we're starting to see already that the flow in the river is decreasing, that we're starting to find more and more chemicals that are indicating that the water quality of the river is deteriorating. When we start seeing these effects in the system, we cannot attribute those effects to a single project or a single economical activity. They are the result of all these combined actions in the watershed. So the mandate that DFO has received is an attempt to start considering these cumulative effects when making decisions about projects. And we can all agree in the fact that this is a very, very complex task. So what I'm going to do for the remaining of the presentation is I would like to touch on a few aspects of the challenge of managing cumulative effects, both from the scientific and the management perspective. So one of the main challenges is defining the scale. Let's go back to our Athabasca River example. Let's say you need to do the assessment of cumulative effects of a small project here in the middle of Fort McMurray and Fort McKay. How do you define the edges? How do you know what is the spatial scale that you need to consider to carry out your environmental assessment if you are asked to include cumulative effects in the system? So the way we do impact assessment currently in most regulatory processes, not just for DFO, is you do it at the scale of the project. You go and sample and see or have an idea, a prediction of what are going to be the impacts of your project on the system and within the spatial scale of your project. But if we're thinking about cumulative effects in the landscape, this is probably not enough. You need to, because you need to take into account that all the maybe the disturbances or like the discharges of the other industry upstream from the place where you're locating your project is also going to impact the way your impacts are going to affect the ecosystem. So this is a very complex issue, and I don't have an answer to that, but just a few thoughts. The spatial scale that we need to consider in this, as a scientist, for example, when I was sitting at a desk and thinking about experiments and things, I used to think that you should always do these types of assessments starting from the headwaters of the system all the way to the mouth. And this would be ideal. This would make sure that we're taking into account all the processes in the watershed, all the things that are happening, all the actors. But in a watershed of this size, it's just not practical. It's just not, we don't have the data, the resources. It's going to be really complicated to do management and to try to even put the data together to do an assessment like that. So we need to find some kind of like middle range in which you can assess the impacts of your projects in the context of major other impacts that might interact with your impacts. And one of the main things that I have also thinking about this process for DFO is that there needs to be clear guidelines as to how to define the spatial scale of your projects. Now, in terms of the scale, the space is not the only factor. Time is also a factor. So how do you define the temporal scale? The way we do, again, assessment nowadays is we use current conditions as a baseline. And this is also not an appropriate way to do it if we want to consider cumulative effects, because the current conditions are the representation of all the impacts that have happened in the watershed or in the system historically. So one of the approaches to get around this is you want to be able to create your baseline based in conditions of how the conditions were before the system was impacted in a large scale. So, for example, going back to the Athabasca River example, you would want to set up your baseline before the late 60s, when all the development started happening in the watershed, and where we weren't seeing any impacts on, or at least large scale impacts on water quality or water quantity. So this is going to vary from project to project, but this has some important limitation, and it's the data. So in order to be able to set up a correct, proper baseline that is going to let us assess cumulative effects, you need to know about historical conditions, and you need to have good data for historical conditions so you can set up your baseline. So this is going to be the next challenge that I'm going to be talking about, and it's data availability. There is absolutely no way that we can do cumulative effects assessment if we don't have good data. I mean, at least not if we want to do good cumulative effects assessment. So, and with the data we need, in terms of data, we need standardized data that is collected with a purpose at a certain scale and with a certain frequency. So long-term monitoring programs, basically. And in terms of cumulative assessments for aquatic ecosystems, we're going to need different types of data. I'm just mentioning the key ones: water quality, water discharge, climate, land cover, aquatic biota. And as you know, or as you might be thinking, this is not necessarily available for all the places where we want to do a cumulative effects assessment. So this is one of the biggest challenges that we're now facing as practitioners, or the DFO is going to face when they're asked to make decisions over the landscape. If we don't have the correct data to do it, it's just not possible. And it has to be at an appropriate temporal and spatial resolution. And the last challenge that I want to talk about is more in the side of the scientific, in the side of the science. I think we still are a long way to have robust predictive frameworks. We still need to work more towards having frameworks that are going to let us assess these synergistic interactions more appropriately to be able to manage ecosystem. So there are some tools already, some interesting tools. For example, there is the stress addition model. This was developed in Europe and is a way to evaluate how the toxicity to organisms changes when there are additional stressors in the environment. And for Canada, there is the threats. So the Healthy River Ecosystem Assessment System, which is a very interesting initiative that is by the Canadian River Network. And what they're trying to do is to put together all the types of the relevant data that you need to do cumulative effects assessment, and to make it available to practitioners and decision makers. So they have, this is kind of like a GIS-based database, and it has access to real time climate, hydrometric data, and some statistical tools, like to study trends, and a decision framework to make decisions on the environment. So I am only starting to learn about this tool, and I encourage if anybody in the audience knows more about it to tell us. But this is one of the options that we have to start kind of like getting into this very complex issue. So that's all I had for today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Anna. Very thought-provoking and appreciate that very much. Is there anyone in the chat, Sam, that has a burning question just for clarification from Anna? If not, we'll move straight along to the next speaker.
I don't see anyone right now, but I think we're good to move on to George for time. And if you think of any questions, oh, there's one. So Susanna asks, in terms of data availability of baseline data, Anna, how might DFO incorporate traditional knowledge?
That's a wonderful question. And I think actually in one of these databases that I mentioned, there is an effort to start incorporating those. And I am not familiar enough with the topic, but it's definitely one of the main issues. Like now, I was talking from the scientific perspective, and a lot of the efforts are geared towards there. But we've been discussing with the other panelists that there's already knowledge, and the frameworks from indigenous communities are way more conservative and might be more appropriate ways to assess or to get closer to this issue of cumulative effects. But yeah.
Great, thank you. And feel free to continue typing out your questions in the Q&A, and we will move on to Deborah. Thank you, George.
Hi, good day, everyone. Just bear with me for a second. I'll get things sorted.
Deborah, I'll just remind people who may have just joined after we had the original introduction, but if you want to shrink the video box that shows up on the presentation screen, you can just shrink it all the way down with the icons on the top bar on the left side, or the second icon is just the speaker only. Video will be present on the slides. And the third one will bring you back to the full screen. Okay, thanks.
All right, so hello again, everyone. Thank you, Bill and Samantha, for the opportunity to be here. It's been great so far. Also talking to my co-panelists in the lead up to this. And I'm really encouraged and energized by the interest in this topic, which I think is just extremely important. And also we're at a point where we have some really interesting opportunities with the Fisheries Act and moving forward with that, and a lot of great work that's going on around the country. So as Bill mentioned, I'm a staff lawyer at West Coast Environmental Law. We're a not-for-profit organization that's based in Vancouver. Our office, although I confess I've only been there once in the past year, sadly, is in the territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Musqueam nations. And my home office is in those territories as well. And this is a picture of Lynn Creek watershed, which is where I live, and fortunate to be in such a beautiful place. We do work to support environmental law reform initiatives and strategies. We have our sort of organizational strategies and objectives, and we also work with clients, including Indigenous clients. And we have we work on Crown laws and policies quite a bit, but we also have a program called the RELAW program, which stands for Revitalizing Indigenous Law for Land, Air and Water, where we work with Indigenous partners supporting the revitalization and the expression of Indigenous laws in contemporary contexts on environmental issues as those Indigenous clients see fit. So today, thank you, Anna, for the really great overview about the science and some insights into what we understand and what we don't understand about cumulative effects in aquatic watersheds. I was really impressed about how you managed to pull that together so effectively in such a short space. So we know there is a lot of work being done here in Canada. And some of that work is going on within DFO itself. There are academic researchers across the country. There's a lot of learning going on through applied context in non-governmental organizations. And it's also, of course, very important to acknowledge the Indigenous-led work that is happening as well, related to fisheries and territorial management. And I think this understanding that going forward, the two-eyed seeing approach is what's needed. So as a lawyer, my work is really focused on this piece of this, which is thinking about how to get to knowledge, so knowing what the problems are, to action on the ground, like making that happen as a matter of course through law, through regular practices that are enforceable. And so it's this interest in managing cumulative effects, but it's also really about managing human activities. So we're lucky. We are in a time of opportunity here, I think, from the point of view of potential federal action in relation to cumulative effects, because we do have these amendments to the Fisheries Act. So as almost everyone on the call will be aware of, we had a period in the not too distant past where some of the key habitat protection provisions in the Fisheries Act were removed. But we got them back. So we had back in the Act. But we also got a few more things that weren't there before, that Parliament thought were important to have going forward. And here on the screen is one of those new additions to the Fisheries Act. And I've condensed the actual provision because it's really lengthy, but this is a general idea, and this is why DFO is having a specific engagement right now around cumulative effects, because in section 34.1 paragraph 1 subparagraph D, now before recommending to the Governor and Council, so that's Cabinet, that a regulation be made, and then it lists all the habitat protection provisions that follow. The minister shall consider the cumulative effects of the carrying on of the work, undertaking, or activity, etc., in combination with other works, undertakings, or activities that have been or are being carried on fish and fish habitat. So the thing that I would really like to draw your attention to here is that the legislation, and this isn't in a regulation, this is in the Act itself, it's noted that before making a regulation, so at the stage of thinking about what a habitat regulation should look like, the legislation is directing DFO to consider what types of cumulative effects might flow from that in relation to DFO decision making. So not just at the point of making the decision, but thinking about how a regulation is made. So I think that's important to keep in mind. I should note as well, as a potential follow-up to this, that we're working on a legal background about this, which will be part of our submissions that we'll be getting in before the end of the month to DFO. But I'd be happy to pass this along to Bill, of course, and circulate it to folks that are on this call. I'm afraid I just don't have that ready yet at this time. So what are we talking about here? And what am I talking about today, and what is the focus of my interest in this? So it is less the effects associated with large projects, which attract a lot of attention and scrutiny typically, and also might meet the threshold for being considered for formal environmental assessment under federal or even provincial legislation. That's not the focus of what I'm describing here today. Instead, we're thinking about the many smaller projects that are going along with often a very light touch, I guess you would say, from the point of view of DFO and regulators, given that it's just perhaps beyond the capacity of DFO to look at every single action that's taken that potentially harms fish habitat, even if technically speaking, that is the mandate that's provided to DFO under the Fisheries Act. So, however, those impacts might seem small on their own, but we know from empirical studies that the cumulative effect, the combined effect of many small projects can be significant on a landscape. And I've just, there's a lot of possibilities to draw on here in terms of that empirical evidence, but I've just taken this from these quotes on this slide from a paper by Charles Ken Mins, who is a researcher who's been affiliated with DFO, but also with academia, who's written quite extensively about science and fisheries and fish habitat management policy over the years, and I think is one of the experts and has a lot of insights about how to make that connection between science and policy. And he noted the likely impact of many small projects likely matches the impact of fewer large projects, and he had some, kind of elegant scientific evidence and reasoning to illustrate that. And he also highlighted the challenge in managing those impacts if you leave the management down to the point of deciding about project by project whether there's going to be an impact or not. It's almost impossible by definition to manage cumulative effects in that way. And I think George in his presentation might describe that in more detail. But anyway, so it was noted that net loss of productive capacity continues because the current regulatory system focuses solely on a project by project, referral by referral approach, rather than a whole ecosystem approach, such as is emerging globally for fisheries management. And so I think one of the things to draw from that is this idea of how do we approach this making of regulations from an ecosystem management perspective. And I suppose just to reiterate, what we're talking about here is not the full range of effects that we're seeing on any landscape typically, but we're really thinking that, if you had a pie that had all of those human activities and the impacts that they are causing, DFO has a slice of that pie. So we're thinking, how does DFO manage its own slice better? And sometimes that will mean taking into account what's around the other activities that are there, but also sometimes it's just looking at those activities themselves. And some more empirical, I guess, evidence of cumulative effects resulting from decision-making and regulation of by DFO. And I don't mean necessarily that this is all about DFO being, just trying to illustrate the problem and suggest that there are solutions going forward, I guess. So we'll get to the solutions part in a second. But as I said, I'm from this area here on the west coast of BC, the Lower Fraser. And there was a study done that came out in 2016 looking at compensation projects, so essentially offsetting projects that had been carried out in the Fraser Estuary from the period of 1983 to 2011. And so this is actually during a period when the Fraser River Estuary Management Program was in operation. And so there was some level of oversight in the Lower Fraser, which doesn't even really exist today. But even in that time, the study found that out of these compensation projects, only a third of them could be said to have been successful. So the idea that no net loss was being achieved simply isn't the case. So we do have cumulative effects associated with existing DFO regulation. And I suspect that those of you on the call could provide all kinds of examples from around the country where we've been seeing these types of cumulative effects. And there are also other empirical studies that you could draw on. For example, the work of Brett Favreau and Martin Olshinsky. There's the earlier work that's been done as well. But yeah, lots of evidence that this is happening. And why does this matter? Well, I mean, it matters because we're losing habitat. But if you think about what's going on, for example, in the Lower Fraser, there's some work that I just heard about today that's going to be coming out of UBC that a graduate student has done there, showing that 85% of the floodplain in the Lower Fraser is no longer either viable habitat or accessible habitat for salmon. So we have a crisis in wild salmon here in the Lower Fraser and on the West Coast, and we don't really have margin for error for tolerating this level of harm associated with regulation. We need to dial it up and have a stricter approach. And I think this is the case for many places across the country. And for places where habitats are less degraded, we want to stop them going down that path. So these are really systemic problems. So there isn't like one easy magic solution. I think it's more about making a commitment to first identifying the problem and assessing it properly, and then moving forward with some solutions. So the ideas that I have here, I'm not going to claim they're all my own ideas. They're just drawn from the literature and from discussions with researchers and regulators. And I'm hoping that they will stimulate some ideas for those of you on the call. So the first one, which I think I've made this point already in this presentation, but managing cumulative effects at the project level is very challenging. But I wanted to highlight this again because this is the approach that has been put forward in the discussion paper around cumulative effects that DFO has presented. I think it's really important to look at the regulatory design and evaluate the effectiveness at avoiding or reducing harm, and keep an eye on how those regulations are working. Because the work that has been done, the empirical studies that I was referring to, for the most part, that is not work that has been done through DFO. That's work that's been done externally. We also have risk management as part of the way that DFO moves forward, and that makes sense. You know, you have to match resources and capacity to the problems, and risk management is a way to do that. But I would say that the risk management approach that's being used at the moment is too risky. And Anna alluded to Indigenous-led approaches that are typically more conservative, based on Indigenous knowledge and thousands of years of successful practice of managing fisheries. And I think we really need to start looking to those as examples of what the level of risk, what level of risk should be tolerated. At the moment, we're kind of backstopping ourselves with some idea about abundant ecosystems that we couldn't, you know, there's always a little bit more that can be absorbed. But as we know, we've gone beyond that point in many cases, unfortunately. There's also a need for place-based regulation. We need to attune the regulatory requirements to watersheds and ecosystem management. And this will put DFO in a better place to be able to collaborate with other authorities, including Indigenous authorities. Again, Anna mentioned this, the idea of shifting baselines. At the moment, I mean, there's a couple of ways that this is reflected in regulation, but one important way is that and to some extent, this is a problem with the existing legislation, but also relates to policy, but we are essentially entrenching historical habitat losses. We're just moving on from where we are now and assuming that that's the best it can be, and that's what we're managing towards, and that needs to be adjusted. And then finally, as I mentioned, there isn't accountability at the moment. And I think a first step with cumulative effects from the perspective of DFO would be to set up a process to acknowledge the cumulative effects that are associated with regulation and decision-making and authorization of residual harm. And so keeping track of that and then starting to set objectives about reducing it as well. So in conclusion, I wanted to have a slide without too many words on it. And I like this one, and I'm hoping there isn't some invasive species that is obvious in this in this picture, but I was looking for a picture of you know, an ecosystem to remind us that we need to think about the needs of the ecosystem, which is kind of the foundation of that, and how we're going to manage our activities in a way that ensures that the ecosystems have what they need as well. And thank you for the opportunity again to be here, and looking forward to discussions and looking forward to hearing from the folks who are attending as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Deborah. Excellent presentation. And a couple things that sort of jumped out for me is that, as you pointed out, the actual language in the Act, and it begs the question of what does consider really mean when we look at considering cumulative effects? And just as a note to people who may not have read some of the background papers from DFO to date, there's really a couple of obligations that DFO has. One is that when it's undertaking works or activities and is in a position to give an authorization for a project, that's one place where it would consider cumulative effects, but also where DFO is invited into a federal environmental assessment to provide advice to whoever is doing the assessment, whoever is leading the assessment, depending on the project. They also have an obligation there. So it's their expertise and availability to data, et cetera. And so it does present a big question about what is it exactly they can bring to the table? Do we have the capacity to do it? So just some food for thought on that. So thank you very much, Deborah. Okay, we're going to cut over to George now, unless there's any burning questions there, Sam, of clarification for Deborah.
I think most of the questions are directed at all panelists, so we can
All
save them
panelists.
towards the
Okay, so
end.
we'll take them a bit afterwards. Okay, George, so we're running a little bit over time, which is fine. So feel free to take the time you had planned for your presentation, George. And thanks again for being with us.
Hello, everyone. I look forward as well to, after my presentation, hearing questions and comments from every of the other participants. My contribution today I've entitled Navigating Cumulative Effects Assessments, 10 Practitioner Insights. So I thought before I go into the remainder of my slides, I'd say a few things in preparation of that. First, what I mean by practitioner. What I specifically mean in this context are individuals such as myself and many others who prepare information in support of regulatory environmental assessments in which the project in question is subject to an Environmental Assessment Act. So we prepare the information, we file, and assist the continuing contribution of the information as we move towards the completion of that review process. There are many other versions of practitioner that have been used, all serving very important roles, contributing to the ongoing evolution of environmental assessment, those who review, those who study and research. But again, my vantage point is that it's a practitioner. And then thinking about what to say as a practitioner for the purpose of today. I'm thinking of DFO as a regulatory authority, and there, of course, are others in the federal family. And you're in a situation, and after reviewing a fair amount of material recently, including that discussion paper that is out for public comment, DFO understandably is in a position like many other such authorities. Well, our act now has the words cumulative effects in it. What do we do now? Certainly those two words have become quite popular. What is very much needed is a catch-up on multiple fronts in terms of understanding from various points of view, certainly as a practitioner, but also by the authorities charged under their mandate to respond in kind. What do I do with this thing now sitting in the act, cumulative effects? And so I thought, of so many possibilities, I chose but 10 for today. Each briefly, I will go through. And they're coming from the following vantage point as well, that a regulatory authority is in a position to be able to do only so much within their mandate. And I can say certainly after now working 25 years doing major regulatory applications for major resource projects and working with many government bodies to assist in terms of guidance and training on environmental assessment, particularly cumulative effects. Cumulative effects is a very scary thing at first, but it doesn't have to be. And the understanding of what you actually have available right now as opportunities to meet these challenges is just as important as what in the future opportunities may yet arise. And I think there's great value in improving some degree of comfort on the matter of cumulative effects, so that going forward, those who indeed are charged with applying it are feeling in an improved position as to how to proceed, given so many possibilities. All right, so number one. There we go, slight delay there. All right, you cannot solve everything. One of the reasons why cumulative effects, where it lands in an act, or it lands in a guideline, or in a policy, or in a research paper, can be a scary thing, is because at first glance, the view is that is essentially assessment of everything on everything. Where does one start? And more pointedly, and certainly a lesson that I have learned, it isn't as much where to start, it's where to end. Given the available information and opportunity one has, how far indeed can one go? Again, as proportional to and relevant to and contextualized to the nature of the task at hand, whether it's a regulatory assessment or whether, again, it might be an authority wishing to exercise their powers in order to pursue various matters. You can't solve everything. There has been much written on the subject of cumulative effects for, well, a very long time. And it continues to be written, and justifiably so. It is quite understandable and easily accessible at face value that there are many things, perhaps arguably too many things at first glance, out there happening to solve. The important lesson coming out of this is understand what you have within your grasp now and what reasonably over time becomes available and you can build on in order to address something that at first, understandably, looks overly complex, almost intractable to solve. But you're not here to solve everything. You're here to solve some things. We'll get to more as time goes by. Number two, what is not defined cannot be assessed. So in the cumulative effects literature, in much of the talk, and you will hear various terms and notions and concepts. Let us do a holistic assessment. Let us approach an ecosystem management basis. All of these terms and so many more resonate very deeply. There's a first intrinsic understanding as to what they mean. But I can say as a practitioner, that's not enough. And I would believe for those charged with administering acts and enforcing certain duties, clarity on these matters is needed much more than currently is available. We need, sitting in front of us, these larger notions. Those are our guideposts to tell us where we want to go, but pragmatically, we have to be very careful and cautious with our terms. And if we do use the various terms as we do right now, we need to make sure we understand what they really mean, not just theoretically, but in practice. Data and insight are what I refer to as the inquiry horizon. And Anna had alluded to this. You can only do as much as you can do with available data information. And data and insight, and that latter word, insight, resonates again very deeply in the world of practice. You can have all the data in the world, you won't necessarily have any improved insight. You need both. You need the ability to look at information in various forms and extract and interpret it. Why don't we admit it? What is it we're trying to assess? It's the complex world out there. It is arguably substantially more complex at the finest grain details than we have the opportunity to pursue and to understand fully. Well, then why don't we simply admit that we work with the data and insight that we have, but we develop process and means to continue building on that. Limited resources are the implementation horizon. So it will eventually come down to resources. We're talking people, time, and budget. And certainly, understandably so, when we talk about cumulative effects and it meets freshwater systems or meets marine systems, or for some projects, both, you could be staring at a map of watersheds in the order of hundreds, if not thousands of square kilometers stretching over a multiple tens, if not hundreds, if not more, size of a watershed. And when looks at that picture, and you add cumulative effects to that, the first view is, how do we even start? How do we then define what the end point is, and how do we move there? And certainly when it comes to various exercises, and not just project-specific EA, but whether it's regional assessments, whether it is the development and promulgation of legit statutory provisions or guidelines or policy or programs, there is only so far one can go, at least as originally planned. To address cumulative effects ultimately does require a substantial degree of resource. Thresholds are scarce. It doesn't take very long as one talks about cumulative effects assessments that eventually, often very quickly, if not immediately, the question comes up in terms of thresholds. We need thresholds. How could we proceed without? Well, there are a few available, but generally speaking, they are quite scarce and hence not readily available as much as we want right now. But with some more time and research and pursuing other opportunities, we'll be able to obtain those. Evidence takes many forms. So certainly the common understanding as to what constitutes cumulative effects and generally environmental assessments, and generally the research-based pursuit of information on whatever spatial scales for whatever constituents, ecologically or physical or otherwise, will necessitate moving ahead to take a wide body of information from many different sources. Certainly traditional knowledge, conventional Western science, they have important commonalities, they have some important differences, and each powerful in their own way, but even more powerfully complementary to each other. I always find it of interest that traditional knowledge is a field program that's been going on for a few hundred years. But it's also true that certain versions of analysis would be available only through other means, but together, very, very beneficial. This is one of the most important rules with cumulative effects. Manage your project first. Cumulative effects starts at each individual project. Yes, there might be more than one. There might be tens, there might be hundreds in a marine environment or in a singular watershed within a valley or multiple valleys. But for each of them, the best way to deal with cumulative effects is not cumulative effects assessment, it's cumulative effects management. Something which unfortunately gets often lost in the pursuit and chase of information, extremely important, as much as one can get. But in the consideration that it will take some time to do so, management opportunities, I would suggest, emerge certainly with what DFO is pursuing in terms of various matters of compensation, which brings us to thought 8 here. Mitigation, monitoring, and compensation. Compensate for gaps, uncertainties, and assumptions. But the combination of mitigation, monitoring, and compensation, certainly, for example, in terms of habitat banking and offsetting in the fisheries context, and there's many other versions of that, allow us to incrementally proceed in time. If you have a dock that's proposed, a small bridge, some dredging, typical activities that may occur from the fisheries perspective, certainly with codes of practice, and a very, very powerful, very useful opportunity in order to address them theoretically, and perhaps possibly in many cases, the implementation of those measures will annul the effects. There's nothing left to act cumulatively. And if indeed anything does nonetheless remain, and many will argue with various degrees, I believe, of reasonableness, that perhaps it may not be 100% so, and anything left over acts cumulatively. For that, we have other measures, which moves us into point 9. Manage regional resources through regional collaboration. Certainly, increasingly, there are examples across the country of opportunities to pursue cumulative effects assessment in this way. And certainly we have seen increasing examples, particularly in various parts of the country, certainly some very interesting ones on the west coast of British Columbia, in which we have Indigenous groups who have initiated these or have collaborated with other jurisdictions. And my last comment is regional assessments are the future of CEA. Now, we will not be able to cover the country yet in regional assessments, and certainly under the new act, where it's been more formalized and made more powerful in terms of translating into actual practice. We are seeing an increasing number of these, but as they do occur, where they do occur, they provide substantial opportunity, of course, to contextualize project-specific assessment, whether it's a dock or it's a $10 billion LNG facility in all cases, with more information available to a regional assessment process, a very, very different process from project-specific CEA. The combination of them over time is going to be a very powerful one that will allow eventually us to meet the future that I believe we all want. Thank you.
Bill, you're just muted there.
Sorry, folks. Yeah, thank you, George. Really appreciate that. That's good presentation for discussion. Obviously, lots of key points there to consider. And I'll just ask first if anyone has any burning clarification questions for George, and then we'll move into what I mentioned earlier about inviting other people from different sectors to make a little presentation if you wish. So any immediate questions for George? None you see there, Sam?
Just for the whole panel.
Yeah, just for the whole panel. Okay. So for those of you who may not have been at the introduction to our webinar today, I mentioned that at this point in our agenda, we are going to invite others from other sectors to make a little presentation if you wish. We had hoped to hear from the full range of sectors. So if you're from a conservation authority, a municipal government, an environmental group, Indigenous group, industry association or particular company, if you have a perspective on cumulative effects discussion here in the context of DFO's obligations, we're inviting you to make a little presentation, take a few minutes and say what you think about this, and that will add to the context of our whole learning dialogue here for our question and answer session. So if you wish to do that, you can just put up your hand now here and put a little note to Sam saying, I would like to speak. And then Sam can identify those and we can give her the opportunity then to set up your controls so you can turn on your video and microphone and be present on the screen. Did I get that right, Sam? That's their process?
Yep, sounds good. So if you raise hand, I will be able to give you the access to share your question live.
Yeah, and we'd love to hear from people, so don't be shy, and happy to accommodate a bit of time for you to get whatever's on your chest off your chest.
So we have Graham here. Hi, Graham.
Hi. Oh, okay. I think the camera's coming up. I'll be brief. I want to first thank everybody and all of the presenters. It's odd because a lot of the internal reflection that we've been doing mirrors what you've said. I'll lower my hand. Doesn't seem you can see me.
We can't see your video, but we can hear you nice and clear.
Perfect. Well, just really quickly, I posted it, my question, I actually reiterated it during the recent DFO webinars that have been on cumulative effects. And my question is knowledge. It's clear that at least the DFO's discussion papers focusing the consideration of cumulative effects really on projects subject to authorizations. So in our neck of the woods, which is in northern Quebec, that would translate into major projects, well, relatively large projects. And I just want to hear from the panel, and of course from anybody who wishes to chime in, is at least the way we see it is we're not too sure about what the DFO actually knows is going on in our region. We don't have metrics of the various minor projects that they review but don't issue an authorization for. And our understanding is for them to do a good job of considering the cumulative effects that a major project may have, they'd still need a pretty fine-grained understanding of what's going on in the project, in and around the project area. And that would include, more minor works. That might evidently also include DFO communication with the provincial government or our regional governments in the neck of the woods, and then of course Aboriginal communities. And I just wanted to know, does anybody have any information on that? I mean, we have yet to get a clear response on how the DFO is going to ensure that it has a clear understanding of what's going on in and around the project area. So with regards to minor projects, but I'd like to hear if from the others if they have the same burning question.
Hey, thanks, Graham. Could you just introduce yourself and maybe put some context on what
of course
sector you represent?
Hey, I'm terribly sorry. My name is Graham Moran. I'm the environmental analyst for the James Bay Advisory Committee on the Environment. And quickly, we're in our jurisdiction is the James Bay Territory, so in northern Quebec. And it's a tripartite treaty body. So my committee is made up of members from the federal, provincial, and Cree government. So we look at any and every kind of legal or legislative change or regulatory change that may apply in the territory.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Graham. And thanks for joining us. Given that was a question to the panelists, probably most efficient just to take it right off the bat here. So any of you, Anna, George, or Deborah, want to respond to that?
Perhaps I'll start. Certainly, the exercise of mapping anthropogenic disturbances were basically what people, for whatever period of time, have been doing out there in whatever region in question, is a substantial exercise in of itself. And certainly it's an important starting point on cumulative effects. It's to know, of course, as much as possible, not just what the natural features are, but what constitutes at least what is observable and measurable, at least one dominant version of a human change. I would not underestimate the level of effort required with such exercises. And of course, that only starts you on what eventually provides one version of the basis of information in combination with many others to then continue on and try to understand what that all means. So certainly the challenge is substantial if you have a relatively large area, and certainly for Northern Quebec, to understand to the best ability and characterize, visualize the manner in which over time, and certainly now and possibly into the future, human change will continue is very important. And yes, I'll conclude on this. There will be a few obvious ones, but it's the many smaller ones, yes, smaller by various definitions, which of course will take a lot of time and often, and as per the material that Anna and Deborah had shown, in fact, one of Deborah's slides had quoted a paper making that very point, and that it's those many smaller human activities which can, in many cases, be results in a much more demonstrable change in that landscape.
Okay, Anna or Deborah, did you want to address that, or were you good?
I guess I would just add, thanks for raising that, Graham. I would have to echo that I don't see at this point in the material and the presentations that DFO has put forward. I've probably been attending the same ones you have. I don't see the response to that. But I guess I'm remaining optimistic. And I think drawing comfort from your presentation, George, as well, that, you know, don't be afraid. we can do this. This is an opportunity. But I think there's a couple of things. One is going back to this tracking piece. That in order to fulfill its legislative mandate, DFO has to be very proactive about keeping track of both the authorizations it makes and basically anything it knows about projects that are going ahead in order to manage at least what it can know. It has to be committed to doing a good job at that and be willing to allocate the resources to do that. We have the public registry that's being developed. I've heard that the new platform that's proposed is encouraging, and we need to get as much information as possible onto that. And then also the piece about you know, sometimes the information that's relevant for determining baselines, which are of course important for making these decisions, are going to be known to other authorities. So there is a collaboration piece around this that is essential as well. And one aspect of that I referred to as the idea of having regulations that are more place-based, that it's going to be hard to have generic regulations that are going to be really effective all across the country. And we're already seeing that in the response, for example, to the, it isn't regulation in the same way, but codes of practice, that they need to be applicable for the places where they're going to be used. And very important in that case, because they're meant to be avoidance of harm. There isn't supposed to be any residual harm associated with codes of practice. So yeah, so I guess maybe those two things about the baselines, the collaboration that's needed through a place-based approach, and then also just like really this needs to be part of this commitment going forward is keeping track of things. And I think, to be clear, this isn't going to be like a one-off thing where this will be done by, a year and a half from now, we'll have this all sorted out. This is a path that we all need to go down with DFO and support this work.
Okay, thanks, Deborah.
I've just messaged to everyone, providing the link to the recently announced NRCan and Environment Canada Open Science Data Platform. This is an initiative which, at least to my awareness, has been in the works for at least 2 years, if not longer. It provides a demonstration of enormous potential, certainly in order to populate fully, if there ever can be a full population of such information. But by browsing through it, which I would encourage people to do, they can see examples of the sorts of things that, the sort of information that Graham has alluded to and others as well. Anna perhaps may have some more comment in regards to some of the realities and opportunities and what may be there in terms of a provision of data as well.
Okay, thank you, George. And thanks, Graham. Hopefully that addressed some of your questions. I'm going to move on now, and thanks, Deborah, to, there's a couple other people here who looks like saying they put up their hand to give a bit of a presentation on their perspective.
Yep,
Before
first
we
we
get into
have
broader question and answer.
Yes, first we have Sama, who's joining us here.
Yeah, go ahead, Sama.
Oh, thank you so much. Highly appreciate it. I actually so happy to be here, and what a wonderful presentation and webinar. Thank you so much, Deborah, George, and Anna. That was like really, really informative. First, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Sama Al-Maroufi. I'm a professor at Lakehead University, Aurelia campus. I'm in ecological assessment specialist and mostly wetland restoration specialist. And I've done a lot of work at a lot of restoration projects, especially in the Middle East, dealing with the Mesopotamian marshes. And I actually through like 15 years studying the restoration potential of these well, like dried marshes, unfortunately, for a decade, and see how the restoration perspective came with challenges and came with issues that it wasn't actually known before. And I thought that my point might help a little bit to address some comments that it might help with determining how we look for conservation and how can we protect our environment and conserve our environment before we see the damage happens. So the first thing that I would like to talk about is understanding the magic of bioindicators. Bioindicators well known in literatures and in science, but unfortunately when it comes to legislation and when it comes to environmental studies where consulting happens, we don't see that much of highlights on how the bioindicator will help us understand how our system going through from time to time. Indicators are important to give us alert of what is the ecosystem is like happening into the ecosystem. It tells us what exactly bothering the ecosystem or like changing the ecosystem and causing a problem to the ecosystem. And also they give us some indication of possibilities on how to cure that system too. So it's not only one objective that it can help us only identify issues. It also help us to know what is the issue and how to prevent it. Having said that, understanding ecosystem from a natural point of view, people or scientists need to bring to their to government attention that any ecosystem is a living component. Any ecosystem is a living component, what that means, it means that living component would have natural development, and natural development comes with natural changes. So changes in the environment, in changes in the original condition or historical conditions is natural. So for example, when we wanted to restore the Mesopotamian marshes after 13 years of dryness, we couldn't, like, there wasn't any opportunity to bring these marshes back to the day that they draw, or like 10 years before they got drawn, because any living component naturally develop, and that development comes from natural and anthropogenic impacts. As Anna talked about, accumulation effect. Accumulation effect can be positive and can be negative to the environment. How it can be positive, it gives a lot of adaptation capacities to our environment and our biological component in the environment. And this adaptation will give us bigger range of tolerate and resist changes. On the other hand, certain durations in certain areas where there is a huge impact that can't be tolerated and can't be positively taken by the ecosystem or dealt with the ecosystem itself, it can be harmful. And here, where we can see the importance of having understanding the bioindication capacity of any ecosystem, is to tell us when we should concern about dramatic changes or harmful changes, and where we consider a positive changes. Positive changes also brings not only adaptation, it brings huge genetic pools to our ecosystem. And that will sometimes, for example, if you have kids, you would live to see your kids growing from being a baby, a child, a youth, and their prospective adults. So these are normal changes and good positive changes, and this is exactly what we need to see in our environment. And we need to see this these positive changes, whether coming from an environmental and natural impacts or anthropogenic impacts. So these are, I believe that legislations in environmental consulting firms or authorities actually needs to pay more attention in understanding ecosystem structure and ecosystem changes over time, and develop these knowledge in terms of understanding the positive changes within the environment and how these positive changes can bring a better health ecosystem to any environment that they're studying. And also such aspect and prospect can be actually go up to protection, like an environmental project, from an environmental protection perspective, or from environmental conservation perspective. Yeah, that was like most of like my comments on some of the things that Anna and George were talking mostly about. And thank you so much for this opportunity. And I hope that I brought to your attention something that it could be valuable.
Yes, very much. Thank you, Sam. I really appreciate that. And with our time crunching along here, I'm going to cut straight to the next person who wanted to present a point of view. Is that Alan? Is that right,
Yes,
Sam?
we have Alan James joining us from Stony Creek.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
Good. Stony Creek is a small creek that starts on Burnaby Mountain at Simon Fraser University campus, and it has historically suffered all kinds of cumulative effects. It started off in the 50s when the first residential areas were being developed. It became channelized. The main sewer line runs down the side of the creek. Then in the 60s, they built Simon Fraser University. There were power lines that went across the area. There are pipelines. There are extra roads. In the conservation area, they built multiple trails for mountain bikes. And so there's all these stressors on the creek. The biggest one has been the road salt issue. Simon Fraser has always salts the roads in the winter time, and this affects both the fish and the benthic invertebrates. We have we've been trying to get some baseline data, albeit not historical data, but recent data. We have about 20 years worth of benthic invertebrate sampling, and we're currently embarking on a region-wide monitoring of creeks for conductivity, which is a proxy for measuring the salt. So I put a link up. I'll put a link up in the chat here, and people can go and have a look at it and see what we're planning.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you.
And is there anyone else who identifies as sort of representing a particular sector that wants to present their thoughts on this? No more hands up, Sam? No?
No more. We can move on to questions.
Yeah, we can go to some questions now. So yeah, we've got about 25 minutes left here. And a couple things we wanted to do. One is we'll go through the chat, look at some of the questions that are there, and we can present those to the panelists. But also, if you wish to respond to one of those questions, if you have some expertise you want to share on that, you can put your hand up and just say response to whoever's speaking. So if you wanted to do a response to Alan or a response to Anna, just put that in your note, and then Sam can identify it's part of the same question and conversation, and then we'll try and move through a few of the questions that we have in the chat. And as a final point, what I'm going to ask people to do, just to think about, and if you're not participating in the questions right now, the last thing we wanted to do with people is invite you to submit in the chat your top 1, 2, or 3 thoughts on what you would recommend to DFO in the context of its questions on cumulative effects in its current engagement and review. Part of the objective of this webinar was to provide people options and ideas and alternatives for commentary to give to DFO should they choose to make a submission to the online input, which, as I mentioned earlier, is due by April 30th. So first off, we'll take some questions. So do you have a couple there lined up, Sam, that you want to highlight?
Absolutely.
Okay.
First, we have a note from Jonathan Ward. Thank you, Jonathan, for joining us. And he says, I think directed out the panelists, with respect to baseline data, what are the panel's thoughts on how proponents deal with existing conditions that are heavily affected by historic activities? And there is the perception that the last proponent to propose a project must take on the responsibilities of all impacts to the environment which have preceded this project. Do you think there is a strategic environmental assessment carried out by the government that would solve this?
Okay. I'll offer that to the speakers first. And also, as I mentioned, put up your hand if you in the audience would like to respond to that. Jump in, anyone from the panel if you wish.
I'm not sure if my panelist colleagues have some more technical comments or practitioner comments on the baseline aspect, but I guess I would say that, I mean, we are to some extent looking at a framework that privileges the harm that has come beforehand to some extent, because the thing that we're harming isn't abstract. Like, we can't go back and say, well, you know, your harm maybe wouldn't have been so severe as some of the things that are happening in the past, so we can let it go. If you know, we're talking about living things. So sometimes in law, this isn't what is under the Fisheries Act, but we talk about the thin skull rule, that you kind of take your whoever you're harming as you find them. So I think it is to some extent this, although I guess there is a sense of, if you have things happening at the same time, how are you going to, if you're going to allow some harm, how are you going to decide amongst them? That is something to consider. But I think that it's hard to, at least for me, to conceptualize how you would, ignore the existing conditions in an ecosystem when you're making decisions.
George or Anna, did you want to respond at all?
Anna, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just a few thoughts on that. At least my impression from reading the papers is what they are requesting is not so much that the proponent takes responsibility for the previous impacts, but that they acknowledge that there are some previous impacts and that they base their monitoring or their mitigations or their prediction of future impacts on what already has happened, acknowledging that some things have already happened and that the new impacts are going to be overposing on that. So that's my impression, that it's not so much that they are going to be required to manage, to like mitigate those impacts, but to understand that new impacts are going on top of historical influences. And maybe Josh can correct me if that's not correct. Yeah.
No, good points, everyone. From a regulatory EA perspective, the matters that Jonathan raises in his question and that have been mentioned in the last few minutes, including by Alan, fundamentally deal with a discussion that has been going on for quite some time, certainly on many fronts with cumulative effect assessment. The current matter at hand, historical baseline, the next one in terms of the degree to which, so to speak, that party is, quote, responsible for addressing various matters. And so it goes. So just to directly respond to the specific points in Jonathan's questions with respect to the baseline data, the thoughts in regards to the view, the expectation and accountability, and also what, notwithstanding that, exists in terms of what's within the realm of the possible by a proponent in an area that has been largely compromised in terms of certain values, is that they are responsible for managing the environment that they will be encountering at the time that they would wish to construct and operate. Now, it is important, and the other panelists have mentioned this, to at least acknowledge and understand first and better what the implications are now in terms of the history that has brought us to this point in time. Certainly, and the last point that Jonathan raised in this question is that, yes, strategic environmental assessment. Strategic environmental assessment is a term more allocated towards the examination of matters of government policy and programs. Regional assessment certainly means essentially the matter of investigation, inquiry, similar in some ways to a regulatory EA, which I and some others have spoken to, and yes, it can go a long way. And just to conclude, Alan, in regards to Stony Creek, so in the Lower Mainland, a population of approximately 3 million people, we have a history of substantial agricultural, urban, industrial development, and so much more for more than 100 years. We've ended up in a situation on a matter which Deborah had alluded to, and that is we are essentially looking at a situation which is a cumulative effect of the culmination of thousands of decisions that have been made along in regards to land and resource use planning. You know, if you look at major centers, urban centers in this country, or major industrial centers, all of these have been a consequence over time, as well as in other areas outside these centers of resource development, decisions that have been made, each on their own right and merits. You wait long enough, and guess what happens? You have 3 million people in the Lower Mainland right now. And it is an inevitability that there's almost nothing you can do that will not have some form of a cumulative effect at that point.
Okay, thanks, George. Hopefully that gave you some food for thought on your question. Sam, is there another one you have available there?
Sure. We have one coming from Gerald. And Gerald says, creating accurate models and assessments of cumulative effects can be very time consuming. So much so as to actually forestall timely assessment to act on. So his question is, in what cases is more science needed versus just very precautionary management? And this question is for anyone and the panel as well.
Okay. You want to start with that one, George?
Sure. It's a very good point, and I agree with Gerald. Fundamentally, a decision is going to have to be made. Do we wait and research, investigate, and study? All very valuable, but for various reasons, which I believe I alluded to and the others. The world is moving on. There are things happening. We're talking about the world changing in real time. And it can be anything from a small dock to a large industrial facility to an agricultural facility to climate change globally, all coming together. So what are we going to do? Well, adopting at least one version of precautionary management, and I believe I alluded to this, of many options of interpretation and way forward, is let's do what we can do in terms of dealing with the immediate matter at hand to the extent possible. But better, we need a backstop, a longer plan and vision that will allow us to continue to improve the ability to, an informed basis, contextualize each subsequent application on its merits as it continues. We will not be able to wait forever for research to be completed. We need that research, in some cases, substantively so. But in parallel with an ability to have a process by law, regulation, and guideline that can be implemented to do everything we can in the meantime.
Okay, thanks, George. Anyone else? Deborah, Anna? Oh, okay, we're good. Other questions there, Sam?
Yep. So we have one from Cameron, and Cameron is joining us from Ontario, representing Freshwater Ecosystem Services. Cameron says, we are currently seeing the results of decades of cumulative effects to freshwater ecosystems across the country. New ways to manage and enhance/improve effectively for an indefinable time have been talked about internationally for decades. With the added impacts of climate change within the next 10 to 15 years, have we considered collaborative, community-based catchment management?
Deborah, do you want to take a kick at that? I know you guys at West Coast and Law have done some watershed related issue, like management issue analysis.
I mean, I guess the short answer is yes. This holds promise, as do other regional approaches. For example, Indigenous-led regional approaches. There's a lot of different things that are going on around the country. I don't want to start naming them and then be leaving folks out, but I guess the point is going back to how does this fit with DFO regulation? And I think what we need to see is DFO regulation that can accommodate these approaches and fit with collaborative efforts. So yes, we need the regulations that can be tuned into regional based initiatives, essentially. And I don't know what I guess that's where I would leave that, but interested to know if Anna and George have more insights into that.
Yeah, I might actually also take a kick at that. I think in some of my work experience was a program called Pacific Estuary Management Program, but it was a collection of agencies, NGOs, community organizations as well, that looked at the collective coastal estuary habitat in the south coast, mostly the south coast of British Columbia and Vancouver Island, and worked in that regional context to look at ways of both doing restoration and conservation, but also providing analysis and sharing analysis in relation to different projects and development issues that were facing any of those authorities that were part of this collective. And that went on for many, many, many years. I believe it still may have some legacy activities as well, but it's the kind of thing that I think is productive and necessary. And I often find sometimes that the agencies these days, and particularly in the wake of, I guess, over the last 10 years plus, going into what we now see as COVID spending needs by government, there's a reluctance, or in many cases an inability, to fund people in those agencies and organizations to just show up to be part of that collaborative. And I think that's something we need to look at, is how do we finance those collective bodies where we actually get more than the sum of the parts out of the group when it comes to performance.
Yeah, maybe I could just add in relation to that. It's getting a little bit away from cumulative effects and thinking about a sort of regulatory presence more broadly, but certainly in BC, and I expect in other places around the country, for many years, DFO kind of provided the backbone for local work around protecting fish habitat. So knowing that there was going to be some regulatory enforcement was helpful, for example, in making decisions at the local government level. And then that presence was really, I guess, lessened over time as a result of decreased capacity among DFO. And now I think we're seeing renewed capacity, but those relationships are still forming again in the communities. But I think that is, again, another potentially hopeful piece going forward, if we have the regulations to back it up.
Okay, great, thank you. Just checking the time here. We've got 10 minutes left. I'm going to take, I know we can't get to everyone's questions, so I apologize for that, but maybe one more, Sam, and then we'll cut to our last little exercise about highlighting some key points that may be considered in people's input to DFO.
Sure, sounds great. So one from Brady. And Brady says, in previous webinars, DFO has noted that this framework will not manage threats outside of the Fisheries Act. If that is the case, can cumulative effects ever be effectively managed? So one for our panelists and or Bill.
My answer is yes, it can be effectively managed. It may not be immediately apparent. There's, in a sense, 3 tiers, if you will, by which engagement can happen. Letters of authorization in regards to specific activities, relatively minor works, undertakings and activities, WAs, which at first glance, notwithstanding each individual importance, relatively benign, certainly relative to other activities. Certainly challenges can be in their own right, and you have a lot of them. But you move up the scale, and certainly through regulatory Project EA, DFO and other regulatory authorities can exercise various opportunities in order to ensure matters under their mandate are adequately addressed. And then in combination through that process, and yes, this, of course, is only confined to a very small fraction of the number of human activities that occur in any given year in Canada, but there's some important ones there, and they do their part. So the answer is yes in that case as well. And certainly then yes, the third and highest tier, which is regional assessments. There is certainly at that point enormous opportunity. So Brady's point is well taken. DFO has in their mandate can only affect directly matters typically those within their authority. So when you talk human effects and you talk of an upstream watershed, everything else which is going on, well, if those things do not fall into a category that DFO may be able to address, and yet in some fashion, directly, indirectly, do have a causal consequence downstream. It is a very, at first, frustrating view. Well, DFO can only do so much. And you're right, correct. They can only do so much that way at that lower tier. But I think as collaboration, multi-jurisdictionally wise, continues, all tiers can play their part in their own way, and collectively, and again, given enough time, we would see an improvement in the ability by, again, any regulatory authority to create the improvement that everyone seeks.
Okay, thanks, George. Any, Deborah or Anna, did you want to respond to that as well?
I guess I would just say, I think George said that very well, and I would just echo that what I think we're talking about here in terms of the Fisheries Act and the requirement is we're looking at DFO taking care of its own business, and that acknowledging that there's going to be collaboration that's needed across jurisdictions to really manage cumulative effects. effectively. But we want DFO to come to the table as all folks at the table, doing its part and taking care of what is within its mandate.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, well, I see we started off the webinar with 117. We're down to 77, which is pretty good. I'm thankful to all of you who stayed to the end here to participate and learn from this. We have one more little exercise we'll do. And that is, as I described earlier, we want for those of you, and we know not everyone will, but for those of you who are planning on making a submission to DFO's engagement consultation process here and putting online comments, we'd like to have people share their top ideas. And what we'll do is distill those out of the chat. So you can write those ideas in the chat. We will distill those out. Sam will be preparing a short document that we'll send out afterwards. And that'll capture those ideas so that you can scan through those and consider them on things you might want to add to your submission. To lead off, I want to demonstrate by example with our expert panelists. Perhaps if you could, while people are thinking or perhaps writing in the chat their ideas, if each of you could give 1 or 2 or 3 things that you think you would prioritize in your submission at this point to give DFO some ideas on how they should address their mandate to consider the cumulative effects and move forward. So Anna, do you want to have first crack at that? If I can pick on you.
For sure, I can try. So one of the things that I've been thinking about, and this goes in lines of I forget his name, Brad's comment, the answer, the question that George just answered, is that it's important that DFO is able to account at least for the cumulative effects that are coming out of their decisions. So I feel accountability, follow up of what is happening at larger scales, like in a watershed, for example. Follow up of the small projects that are being monitored, and some we want to have the data available to know what those small projects that are happening or that are being approved by DFO, how they are impacting the environment. So I would request just collect the data and make it available, and let's have accountability for those decisions.
Okay, thank you. Deborah, do you have something on the tip of your tongue?
Yeah, sure. And it actually is also in response to a question from Pat Matthews, which I think is a really good question about should this be left to the stage of authorizations and the decision making around that in terms of considering cumulative effects. And I see in the legislation, I see the obligation to consider cumulative effects at the time of designing regulatory tools. So for example, as Pat has mentioned, the prescribed works regulation is currently under development. I think cumulative effects should be a lens that's applied to consider what level of residual harm is expected from the implementation of that regulation, and what is an acceptable level and how is it going to be tracked. And then I think this links as well to what Anna said, that this idea also of tracking and sharing information about authorizations, and as much information as is available. Again, it was pointed out that what's going to be in the public registry isn't all the information that DFO has, but I think we need to move towards a place where we have a very broad disclosure of that information so that it can be tracked watershed by watershed around the country and put together with other data. So those essentially those 2 things, that cumulative effects needs to be a lens that's applied at the level of regulatory development, and also that we need a commitment to tracking and sharing and following up with the information that's relevant for understanding the impact of DFO decision making from the perspective of cumulative effects.
Excellent, thank you. George, any top issues for you?
Of so many possibilities. My topmost suggestion and recommendation to DFO is you recognize what you can do now and what now you cannot do. But what you can do, maximize to the extent that you can all opportunities that you have within your mandate and resources. Certainly recognizing as well the legitimacy and power of already what you have started in regards to dealing with individual types of undertakings, and attempting to provide means by which they can be mitigated to as much an acceptable point as possible. Then build from there and go from there and start thinking more broadly.
Okay, great. So hopefully those of you online still have had the chance, if you can, to write your thoughts into the chat. And I would invite you to get in touch with Samurai at any time and follow up. You can look forward to some feedback from us in a short written document, as I mentioned. And also, this recording will be made available. So if people want to listen to this again or share it with colleagues who they know who aren't able to attend but may wish to listen, you'll have that recording. And I also wanted to note that this is the first in a series that we're doing. We'll be hosting another webinar on habitat banking and offsetting policy, which is another issue that DFO is currently conducting an engagement on, and similarly has for the first round of online input to their engagement process, it's April 30th deadline. So we'll be hosting this next webinar the week of April 25th. The exact date is yet to be determined, probably the Tuesday or Wednesday that week, but we have to confirm with our panelists yet, make sure we can get everyone there. So we invite you all to that second webinar, or tell your friends and colleagues who may be interested. You can always check our social media links at Aquatic Habitat Canada for more information. And thank you all again. It's been wonderful to have your participation and support, and great show of people for the presentation. I know we had people from many different sectors and practitioners from all angles across the country. So thank you again. And thank you to Sam for big applause to you for setting up the Zoom link and coordinating all of this and making sure we had all the technical elements in place to make this work. And big thanks to our speakers, the panelists. We'll send you a virtual gift in thanks. I know it's taken up your personal time and work time, so it's a great contribution to us and we really appreciate it. So on that, Sam, unless you have any other comments, we'll respect people's time. It's on the button noon, and noon my time, 3 your time.
Sounds great. Thanks again for joining us, everybody. And our information is on the screen as well as on the chat. And I look forward to seeing you in future events.
Okay. Have a good day, everyone. Bye for now.
Thank you.